Welcome everyone to this session on Energy, the New Africa. My name is Eniola Harrison, and I'm a communications consultant and co-founder of Africa Communications Week. And we do have with us four amazing speakers, and I will just introduce them briefly and then ask them to tell us more about what they do before we dive into the conversation. So we have with us today Ted George, who is the Chief Narrative Officer at Kleos Advisory, and he's a thought leader on disruptive technologies in emerging markets. We also have with us Olaedo Osoka, Head of Daystar Power's Accra office. We have with us today Ademidu Edosomwan, the Managing Director of the Emerging Markets Group of Total Carbon Neutrality's Ventures, and they're focused on investments in energy access. And we have Ivy Apea Owusu, who is the CEO of Cyrus Oil Services. So welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. And today we'll be discussing what I think is the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity for Africa's transformation and development, which is energy. So I'm just going to start off with Ted. Just introduce yourself. Tell us more about yourself and what you do.
Yes, thank you. So I am the founder and chief narrative officer of Kleos Advisory. I have a long history of working in Africa at the Economist Intelligence Unit. I was also head of research at EcoBank. So my interest, particularly when it comes to energy, I've been involved a lot in the combination between solar and fintech, which is very good at getting at that part of the population who are not connected to the grid. But I'm also interested in everything to do with the energy balance. And so my interest is certainly Pan-African. And at my company, I do thought leadership, and I also do a lot of strategic advisory.
Great. Thanks, Ted. Olaedo, would you tell us more about what you do?
Thanks. So I'm the CEO of Daystar Power in Ghana. Daystar Power is a renewable energy company, and our vision really is to provide businesses in West Africa with cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable sources of electricity. We started in 2017, and since then we've rolled out and expanded from Nigeria to Ghana, where I sit, but also other West African markets like Togo and Senegal. So we currently power over 200 locations in these markets.
Great. So it's a pleasure to have both of you on here. And while we're waiting for the other speakers, we'll go ahead and start. So both of you have interests and you're working in new and emerging, I would say, tech, renewable energies, the intersection of solar and fintech. So Olaedo, let's start with you. Tell us, what are some of the biggest, I would say, opportunities and challenges in renewables that you're seeing?
Super. Thanks. I think in speaking about the challenges, right? I think the opportunities lie in these challenges, and it's important for us to remember sort of the big picture, right? Which is that 570 million people on the continent, so more than the population of the EU, don't have access to power, and a critical barrier is the cost of energy. So currently, just to put it in perspective, if you compare the cost of energy for businesses in Norway to businesses in Nigeria, we find that businesses in Nigeria are paying about 400% more, right? So we can't build economies on the back end of very high, expensive power costs. So those are sort of the challenges we're facing, right? But in those challenges, what we're seeing is that in the last 12 to 15 years, costs of renewables have dropped significantly, so by almost 30%. So we're now seeing sort of the emergence of a very nascent industry in Africa, where through our renewable energy technology, we're able to reduce power costs and really reach even the last mile consumers and provide them with cheaper energy.
That's great. Ted, would you like to add to that?
Yes, no, I think it's a really good question. This thing about the provision of energy is central to the success of any economy. And I think the two biggest challenges out there, very much one is the cost to connect. If you're in a city or a major conglomeration, it's not too difficult. But for a peri-urban community, informal settlement, rural communities, they may never be connected to the grid. And you're just cutting these people out from the economy. But the other thing is also when you do get access to power, it's very expensive, just like was said before. I mean, to give another example, in Kenya, if you want to recharge your mobile phone, it takes about 2 hours. And the amount of power you get for that, to recharge that, you would pay, let's say, 50 shillings for. For the same amount of money, you would get 700 times the power in the UK on mains electricity. It is expensive to be poor. So I think the really interesting thing here in terms of the opportunity is that there are a series of problems out here to do with power provision. Some of them are for big industries, for people living in urban areas, but other are for people who are part of the disconnected. So for me, it's all about the power mix. I'm really interested in solar fintech, but there are lots of other ways around there to finally get there and connect these final people to the grid or to power. Because power is actually what powers their mobile phones, which is the digital economy. So it's essential more than ever now.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about this solar fintech power mix. Tell us a little bit about there and where you see the opportunities in this area.
Well, I think the solar fintech mix is particularly good for what Olaedo was talking about. In other words, those populations who are disconnected from grid, the 600 million who do not have access to power. Because for a lot of them, they could never afford a connection. And also, if you put in a permanent connection line to someone they can't pay, you've actually lost the money as well. It's different if you give them a solar unit. The brilliance of it is the modern solar units are very robust, very efficient. They have software which makes you use the power properly. But also the thing is that you pay for them via mobile phone and the unit charges the phone. So the beauty of it is the cost of the solar unit per day is roughly what you would spend for kerosene and to recharge your phone. So it's neutral. The difference is you not only get all the benefits of that, but at the end of, let's say, a year and a half, you own the unit plus, so that means free power for, let's say, at least 10 years, but also you have a credit history. So then you can start borrowing against it. So many companies, the moment you've paid off the unit, they say, keep paying the same amount every week or every day, and we'll give you a widescreen television, which runs off this unit. So the thing is, you're literally creating a consumer out of thin air by letting them borrow against something that you've sold them. It's brilliant. But for me, it's combining the mobile with the solar. The two together, you suddenly get a power like nothing. And you can literally create a consumer and help them power all the devices and things that they want.
That does sound really, really brilliant. Olaedo, in your experience, so delivering affordable, cheaper electricity or renewable electricity, is this something that you are also considering and you are also working with? So that's sort of intersection between solar and fintech, or just tell us, for those of us who are, I would say, who are not in the energy space, demystify this for us. How are you able to deliver cheap, affordable electricity to millions of Africans who need them?
Okay, thanks a lot for the question. Right. So I think it's helpful to give context. And if we look at context in a lot of the economies and countries in Africa, what we find is that they're either reliant on inefficient and expensive and unreliable grids or polluting and expensive diesel generators, right? So if we talk about accelerating energy access, we cannot, at least history has shown us that we cannot rely on the grids, right? Because to reach those 600 million people, it's just too expensive, too inefficient to have a centralized solution, right? So solving the issue that we're facing needs a decentralized solution that's faster, that's efficient, and that's cheaper to maintain. So that's context. In terms of how we're able to make our solutions cheaper and more reliable, I think the first important point, which I mentioned earlier, was about how prices of renewables have slowly been reducing, right? So between 2010 and 2018, there's been around a 77% reduction in solar PV costs, right? So all of a sudden, we have a very compelling commercial case of offering a solution that's cheaper to the traditional energy context. That's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of integrating renewables with technology, is, from a cost perspective, right, the cost of adding automation to your solution is about 1% of your project cost, right? So it's almost negligible. But then if you think about the value of adding this automation, right? So for instance, in the sites where we roll out renewables, we're able to get very concrete and granular data points around consumption patterns, around inefficiency, around performance, which helps us to optimize the systems. So if we think about the value of this automation for our modular sites, but also countries at large, it's invaluable. And again, if we look at the traditional context, in a lot of our countries, the grids have failed because they haven't had this automation. So if I'm a grid provider and there is a village that's 500 kilometers away from my central network and there's downtime, typically I'm not aware. And even if I'm aware, I cannot remotely assess what the exact problem is. So what we're finding is in integrating automation into our solutions, we have full visibility. We can minimize human interface. COVID has shown us how we need to be able to work remotely, right? So with renewable energy technology, that's something we're equipped to currently do. And we can optimize and improve power production and system performance using this technology.
That's brilliant. Ted, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting what you're saying there, Olaedo, because there's the potential now with the technology we have, particularly when it comes to everything in the cloud and the management of the systems and IoT, connecting things together, that you can take what is in reality a very fragmented system, but you can make it connected digitally, you know. And exactly as you said, I think it's such an important point. If you can ascertain what the problem is, even if you can't fix it, that changes the whole way about how you do it. Just saying it's down, we've no idea, it could be weeks. It may actually be something very simple that you could literally send a guy out on a motorbike to fix, or it could be a massive problem. But I think this whole thing, and you see it in the agricultural sector as well, but you can take what is a fragmented system, but if you have the right devices to connect it all together, that level of visibility means much better control, better efficiency.
Great, thank you, Ted. So let me move on to sort of the investment that it takes to make this possible. What are some of the trends that you are seeing in investment in this space? And either of you can take the question. Whoever wants to go first.
I know, Olaedo, do you want to
go? Okay, yeah, let me start. I always like to provide context, right, because it adds more color to the discussions. So the International Renewable Agency, they estimated that we need on the continent around 70 billion every year from 2015 and to 2030 to bridge the power gap, right? So that's significant, particularly if you're looking at our infrastructure budgets in our countries. And we have such a long way to go. But in terms of trends, right, I'm quite optimistic for a number of reasons. We're starting to see a collective awareness about the need to have more sustainable power systems. It's becoming increasingly clear that we cannot rely on the existing infrastructure. So there is more capital being deployed to the continent to improve our power infrastructure. Daystar Power, for instance, has raised more than $10 million in the last 2 years for this purpose, right? So that's one, this optimism, right? And we are seeing investment actually coming into the sector, again, because the business case is really compelling. Costs of renewables are going down, electricity prices are going up, businesses have a mandate to become more sustainable, to become more green, right? Investment funds also have sustainability and ESG mandates, right? So it seems like all the dots are naturally connecting. But what we need to see is this investment be accelerated, right, by policies that enable this investment? And I'm sure we're going to talk a bit about that. So I'm going to hand over to Ted.
I know, beautifully put. Yeah, I think all I would say is I think there's a lot more diverse funds now who specifically want to go green or sustainable. And the truth is, a lot of them are sitting there scratching their heads, thinking, where can we actually put this money? So sustainable energy and everything from biofuels to distributed power to renewables, all the different kinds that are in there. I think that's now actually opening up as a big area for investment. There's interest there. But I think the other interesting thing is how an investment in energy enables you to piggyback on other kind of investments. You know, if you're trying to, let's say, get to the SME sector, which is so difficult to do, or let's say you're trying to get to the average consumer, the first time African consumer as well. Well, if they have power, that means they can charge their mobile. That means they're digitally there. If they're already paying for their power digitally, they can pay 20 cents a day for insurance or 10 cents a day for television or for an app or for a song or whatever. The point is it's a means of actually accessing the market as well. And I've certainly seen some investments where they see a power company, which is specifically about getting people on power for the first time, that's getting customers on board for the first time as well.
Mm.
So thank you for that. Thank you for those contributions. Before we move on to the policy angle, I just wanted to acknowledge that Ademidu and Ivy are on here, but are still having some connectivity issues. So, if we do have, please, at least we have the chat box to sort of contribute to the conversation as well. I know it's not optimal, but unfortunately, we're still having these issues. But thank you, both of you, for still being on here, and we're really sorry about the technical challenges. But just going back to what Olaedo was mentioning around the policy considerations, can you share with us a little bit more what some of the policy considerations that we need to see to accelerate this investment in the sector that you are talking about?
I guess, again, starting with context, right? I guess, Ted, you rightly mentioned we can't build competitive economies on the back end of expensive power costs. So to the extent that we are aligned on that, private sector and public sector, I think one of the first questions that immediately jumps out to me is, why do we have monopolies in some countries for generation of power, right? If the grid exists and is expensive and inefficient, why are we not allowing private sector renewables generate cheaper and more reliable power? That's the first question. I don't know if there's anybody in government here. Help me answer the question, please. The second would be sort of alignment of priorities, right? So very often what you find is that on paper, we see governments saying that they want to promote cleaner energy. So for instance, there's going to be no customs duties. But in reality, when you get to the port, perhaps you're getting zero custom duties, but actually they're then throwing in other levies and fees, which actually you'd have been better off with the custom duties anyway. So if we're aligned, can we then now have a coherent approach in terms of making sure we're seeing the development and acceleration of the industry? And the last point will really be around policies that encourage financing, right? So we've established that there's a lot of capital globally going into sustainability, but I think it's very important for us to also have local solutions. So how can we encourage local financing options which are tailored to the market? So not USD debt, but actually local currency with reasonable interest rates. So if you're offering me a 30% interest rate because you think it's a nascent industry, I can't compete, right? So we need to see the government doing more. I know in some countries, you find the central bankers requiring that banks have a certain quota of financing sustainable companies, right? We need to see more of that. We need to see more acceleration and consolidation of the efforts of government in accelerating the industry.
Thank you so much, Olaedo. So we've only got 30 seconds left. So Ted, would you just would you give us your tips and on what policy considerations we need, and then yes, we'll end with that.
Okay, now I'll keep it super quick. I'd say, look, it's really two things. I think the first thing is there needs to be a clear recognition and a change in the way they do things from governments about an energy mix. There has to be a mix of energy.